Welcome, folks. My name is Ken Owen. I'm Executive Director of Channel Islands Restoration, and I'll mention a few things here and there to get us started, and we'll get into our presentation, which tonight is the Island Fox, Partner in Restoring Island Plant Communities, with Mike Watling and Carrie Dearborn from Friends of the Island Fox. So on webinars, you probably know that your audio will be muted. And we, of course, welcome your questions. I already see John has put something in there to say hi and looking forward to the webinars. Thank you, John. And we will answer those at the end so we don't interrupt the flow. And we try to combine questions that are, similar and do that kind of thing to be able to be efficient about it. But feel free to put your questions in ahead of time so that they all don't flow in at the end at once. That's usually how it works. But if you can get them in early, that's even better. So just put those in the Q&A. That's the best place to put it rather than in the chat. But we look around and try to find them wherever they show up. But Q&A works best. And enjoy the talk and have fun. Advance the slide now. And I want to tell you just a little bit about Channel Islands Restoration. If you don't know about us, we're a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We're a habitat restoration contractor for a lot of different agencies, from the U.S. Navy to folks like the Nature Conservancy, the Forest Service, and we work from northern Santa Barbara County down to portions of Los Angeles County, and in the Los Padres National Forest, the Angeles National Forest, along the Santa Clara River watershed, and everywhere in between. We have a lot of projects going on. We also do environmental consulting, and of course we do environmental education, this is part of it, and we work with a lot of kids as well. We have a great webinar series and have been doing, started it, I guess, last year, or I guess it was toward the end of the year before that, really. And this is just a repeated scroll, but it gives you just kind of an idea of what you can find on there. And it's of many topics. Most of it's Channel Islands oriented. Most of it is biology oriented, about native plants and animals, but some of it's about cultural items as well, cultural topics, and sometimes about things that are not just Channel Islands oriented. It can all be found on cirweb.org/webinars. So check out our past recordings. There's a lot of neat stuff on there.
Yeah. Cool.
At that address, cirweb.org/webinars. So it's my pleasure to introduce Mike and Carrie tonight. Mike Watling is president of Friends of the Island Fox. He's been active with the organization since 2017. He works in the biomedical field and volunteers as part of the Channel Islands Naturalist Corps. Carrie Dearborn has been part of Friends of the Island Fox since its inception in 2005, and she has a master's in environmental education and is a nonfiction writer. She acts as Friends of the Island Fox's educational director. We know these folks because Mike and Carrie served on the Channel Islands Restoration Board for 2 years, from 2018 to 2020, when they were between nonprofit statuses. I guess that's how I put it, right, guys?
Yeah.
But for a while, they were under the umbrella of Channel Islands Restoration, and we had the pleasure of working with them and helped to facilitate the Friends of the Island Fox program. So without any further ado, I'll stop the share and I'll turn it over to Mike Watling to open up his presentation.
All
Thank you,
right. Thank
Ken.
you, Ken. Really
Yeah.
appreciate that. Here we go.
Well, thank you very much, Ken. And I just want to say that we, Friends of the Island Fox, really appreciated the time we spent with Channel Islands Restoration. And we still work closely with the organization when we can. So, for example, we have some students who are working on a fox project, but they wanted to go out and do plant restoration. And so they are trying to be part of one of the groups that's going out in August that Cindy Kimmick is taking out. So still a lot of work back and forth between us. And that makes sense because the island fox is really intricately connected to the ecosystem and to the plant communities out on the islands. So there's really this synergy back and forth between the animals, the plants, and our organization and CIR. And the survival of island foxes as a species is really vital to habitat restoration efforts out on the islands because the foxes are really important in helping to restore Channel Island plant communities. And that's what we're going to kind of talk about here tonight. But we're going to start with just a little background on foxes. So next. Most of you are very familiar with this kind of a map showing our Channel Islands, and island foxes are found on the 6 larger islands off the coast. And on San Miguel, Santa Rosa, and Santa Cruz in the north, the Channel Islands, part of the national park, this is where we had populations that went into steep decline, as well as down on Catalina Island. Next. So you can see that from around 1996 to the year 2000, we had dramatic declines of island fox populations, with Santa Rosa and San Miguel getting down to just 15 surviving individuals. Next. And the cause for this was complicated. On the northern islands that are part of the park, it was ecosystem collapse, where over time, having domestic animals, goats, pigs, sheep, that had been introduced to the ecosystems, all herbivores, all eating away the native plants, we get the first changes in the islands. There's less food resources for foxes, but also there's less cover. And then after World War II, with the introduction of DDT, both on the mainland, agriculturally, and with that going out into the ocean, and then also with some introductions directly into the ocean, we see a huge impact on the marine ecosystem, which impacts the bald eagle that's out on the islands. The bald eagle, being a fish specialist, did not interact directly very much with island foxes, but did help to keep other large predatory birds away. When the bald eagles disappear by the 1960s, there's this opening, a niche in there for a large bird of prey to show up on the islands. And sometime during the 1990s, nobody knows exactly when, golden eagles started to colonize the islands, reproduce out there, and they started to prey first on the feral pigs that were out there because golden eagles are a mammal specialist. That's their food base. But then they started to prey on the foxes, which had never had a predator before. At the same time, canine distemper was introduced to Catalina Island. In about a year and a half, we saw 90% of those foxes die from canine distemper. So dramatic declines going on 2 different northern and southern islands all at the same time. Next. But the really exciting part about foxes is that we've had a very dramatic recovery across the islands, so that you can see that today we have stable populations. You'll notice that the San Miguel, the red line, is much lower than the others. And this is because San Miguel is a much smaller island, and it can only really support now a fairly small population of foxes, probably under 400. So today, next, our Threats to island foxes are biosecurity. That's the introduction of disease through pets like dogs, but also feral cats and other animals that are transported out from the mainland to the islands, like that raccoon that you can see there on the Catalina Express on New Year's Day a couple years ago. This kind of event happens fairly regularly, a couple times each year. So protecting foxes from introduced disease from other animals. Also, we're beginning to think that people can be a vector, especially for tick-borne disease, bringing it out to the islands. And there's growing concern about species that are coming up from the south, migrating farther north than they have in the past because of climate change. Next. And climate change is a very serious issue for island foxes. Not only are we seeing increased threat from wildfire, but also drought. The drought with the less rain means that there's less food, and less food for island foxes means fewer pups, less reproduction. Next. Part of the reason why the impact of the loss of rainfall is so great on island foxes is because of the fact that they are so highly omnivorous, as well as being the top predator. So they are eating across the tropic scales. They are eating directly from the plants. They are plant fruit consumers, but then they are also eating all of the other animals that are dependent upon plants. So any part of the ecosystem that starts to suffer from drought, wherever that is, it's going to impact island foxes and cause them to have altering of their diets. Next. The first place that we really knew had data that rainfall was directly impacting island foxes was on Catalina. And you can see on this graph, this is looking at rainfall in inches on Catalina. That's the dark line with the little circles. You can see that the number of inches of rainfall is along the left-hand side. In 2017, we had more than our minimum normal rainfall. So out there on Catalina, 12 inches is what they need to have a minimum normal rainfall. And they had over 15 inches, so that was good. But 2018, dramatically lower rainfall, less than 5 inches. 2019, once again, up over 15 inches. But then 2020, coming back down to that normal minimum of rainfall that they need. 2021, again, dramatic drought down to less than 5 inches. And this year, we are still under what they need as a normal minimum rainfall. And the fascinating thing is how closely island fox populations follow the rainfall. So those green bars are showing you the number of foxes out on the island, and with the number for the foxes being along the right-hand side. And you can see that when there is above average rainfall, we get increases in foxes. But when we hit those drought years, we start to definitely see a reduction in foxes. And part of this has to do with not only that it's food stress, but there's kind of a shutdown of reproduction. When there's a lack of resources, because they're canines, they have this amazing ability to shut down their reproduction. So looking at 2022, where we're below that normal rainfall that's needed out there, we really don't know exactly what we're going to see with foxes having multiple years of drought. We are expecting to see decline. Not a huge amount, but to see the population adjust downward. Next. Now, the interesting thing is that this is not just on Catalina. We see it across the islands. And what I find really fascinating about this graph is how you can really see how the impact from drought is seen across the islands. So each one of these bands of color represents a specific island. So you can see that dark kind of purpley band at the very bottom, that's San Miguel, a much smaller population than the others. And then the yellow band, which is the thickest one up there at the top, that's Santa Cruz, our largest fox population most of the time. You can see that the orange of Santa Rosa is kind of creeping in on it, surpassing it a little bit. But in 2018, you can see that dip across the islands when we had drought. And then in 2019, everybody then rebounding upward because rain equals healthy foxes and healthy reproduction. But what's really fascinating here is if you look at that green line, that's San Clemente. In 2020, as everyone else is kind of adjusting down, we have a peak on our green line on San Clemente. Now in 2019, they had gone up just like everyone else, but at the end of the rainy season in 2020 on San Clemente, they had a storm cell that brought them extra rain that the other islands did not get. And that had a direct impact on the plant life on the island, and then also on the success of foxes on that island. So you can see just a little bit more rainfall can have a huge impact for the plant life and for the foxes. 2021, everybody's adjusting down, and we're waiting to see what happens, how foxes do this year. Next. So across the islands, island foxes are really important as restoration partners because of these relationships that they have with plants. So this is an island fox up on the top of the hill up there on Santa Rosa near the cloud forest. And while foxes don't have a direct impact on oaks, they do have a very important impact on a lot of fruit-producing plants on the islands. Next. From the Catalina cherries and the toyon, the prickly pear, manzanita, all of these fruiting plants are food for the island fox. Next. So the island fox has a mutualistic symbiotic relationship with these plants. The fox is getting important food and moisture from the plants, and then the plant is getting something of equal value. Now, because the island fox is a canine, it does not have teeth for grinding up seeds, but it can swallow a large seed like the Catalina cherry pit. And because it's a canine, it doesn't have the digestive system for digesting seeds. So instead, the island fox is going to disperse those seeds. Next. So across the islands, the island fox is helping plant species move their seeds around the island, even moving them uphill, which for a lot of these plants is difficult to do. Next. Not only that, we're now looking into some other research regarding seed germination. We have anecdotal evidence from an undergraduate student who did her research project on manzanita seeds. She looked at seeds that had gone through the gut of an island fox and compared them with seeds that had been treated with fire or had been treated with a light acid, because the seeds have a very strong capsule around them that protects the seed. So she was looking to see which one of these methods would increase germination. And in her small study, she found that it was going through the gut of the fox. So right now there is a larger research project going on at one of the major universities on the West Coast, and they are looking at various seeds that have gone through and ended up in fox scat, and whether or not that is increasing the germination for those plants. They're actually growing the plants that have been through the fox or as a control that have not. Next. Island foxes are also directly interacting in a helpful way with plants because they are a predator of many plant predators. So they are eating grasshoppers. They're also eating the introduced earwigs that are out on several of the islands. Next. And of course, they're also eating seed predators like the island deer mouse and different songbirds. But it's really especially that deer mouse that, if unchecked, can have huge population booms. This is what we saw on San Miguel Island when foxes were entirely in captivity, that the deer mice started to eat away the seed bank. And then they went into dramatic population crashes because they couldn't find enough food. So by keeping a balance in these seed predator populations, it also has an important impact on the different plants. Now we also have new research that's looking at that whole idea down there in the bottom right-hand corner. This is some research that's been partially funded by Friends of the Island Fox, and it's looking at the interconnection between the island fox and marine nutrients, and potentially bringing those marine nutrients up into the interior of the island. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike, and he's going to tell you about the research.
Thanks, Carrie. So since 2018, Friends of the Island Fox has been offering annual research grants. And one of the first grants we offered was for diet analysis through isotopes found in the whiskers to Julianne Schammel. She's a fox biologist out on the Northern Islands from the National Park. And we funded her 2018, 2019, and 2020 because of the importance of the work that she's doing out there. And whoops, there we go. So this is some of the data that has come back looking at the stable isotopes. Now, stable isotope analysis is based on the principles of you are what you eat. So stable isotopes ratios vary among food webs and are incorporated into an animal's tissue, or in this case, the whiskers, via diet. And it is thereby possible to infer the whereabouts of how an animal is moving through the food web. If it's eating plant material, if it's eating protein such as a deer mouse, or is it feeding on the in the beach environment. Now, what are stable isotopes? Well, most elements, so if we think in this case of carbon and nitrogen, so if you go back to your basic chemistry days, most elements exist in two or more forms, and these forms are known as isotopes. And isotopes have the same number of protons, but differ in the number of neutrons, resulting in different masses. Now, the protons and the neutrons make up part of the nucleus, and you have the electrons orbiting on the outside, and that's kind of your basic structure of an atom. And these differences in masses can be measured on very sophisticated and sensitive instrumentation. Now, carbon isotopes, especially carbon-13, which you're seeing on the left of the graph, can be used to distinguish between different types of plants based on the photosynthesis pathways. So you have some plants, such as broadleaf plants, which you notice forbs, differ in their synthesis pathways than grasses. And additionally, marine type plants have their own little bit of a difference in their carbon signatures. So you can get a sense, you do what's known as prey species mapping. You can get a sense of where the animal is consuming getting that carbon resource. Is it kind of a plant? Is it marine life and the different types of plants? And then the nitrogen content, which is found on the right side of the graph, is used in addition to or in combination with the carbon information, and that provides more information of where the animal is eating through the trophic levels. So if you think about, you know, your primary producers, like just let's say a plant and the plant seed, and the primary consumer would be the deer mouse, and then a secondary consumer would be the island fox eating the deer mouse. And as the food is processed in the gut of the deer mouse, it has a type of nitrogen signature, and then as the deer mouse is consumed in the fox, that gives a different type of nitrogen signature, and you can get a sense of where they are eating in the food chain. And then so here we have a whisker sample. So each whisker is about 6 to 8 centimeters long, so about 3 inches long, and it reveals about that will give you a 5 to 6 month dietary record. Each of these dots, so we have kind of the white dot is your carbon signature, the black dot is your nitrogen signature, and based on the profile here of this one fox whisker, so this is just one fox, for a period of approximately 2 months. So each of these is a 2-week, approximately a 2-week period. The fox was consuming a lot of marine resources, which is something that was not very well understood years ago when work was beginning with the fox. Now, what we've been finding out through the research is some foxes are eating the beach hopper. So in the beach rack or seaweed, you have these little, get the laser pointer. You know, you've seen the little beach hoppers there. They're eating that in the carbon debris. And the current study is showing that the foxes are using this as kind of a not consistently. It's a variable part of their diet, as we saw in that last slide. But they are using the upper ecozone of the marine area, so up past where the wash is on the beach, to consume these little arthropods. So the foxes aren't going down more into the beach wash area where the waves are crashing. You know, predators like the foxes don't want to get all wet, so they're not out there to go take a dip in the water, and it becomes very difficult for them to get the crabs, so they're consuming higher up on the beach, and this is what that study is showing. And then what's very interesting about this is the foxes are then moving this higher nitrogen content scat, essentially, is what they're going to be producing, right? The kind of the byproduct is going to be higher in nitrogen. They're going to be moving it into the interior of the island. How far into the interior, we don't know yet. And how many foxes are really utilizing this is not well known. They're playing a very important role in transporting nutrients into the interior of the island, but yet at this point it's still undescribed, and it's starting to be explored out here on the Channel Islands. So the Friends of the Island Fox has funded a couple of big studies this year that will include, that's going to be beginning in the summer, and it's actually probably beginning shortly after the 4th of July, when a monitoring season begins on the Northern Islands. They're going to be monitoring 25 foxes with GPS collars, and we're integrating 2 different research projects. We're continuing to fund Julianne and her research in the diet analysis. She will have some GPS collared foxes that she'll be studying on the in the beach area on the island. We're finding anecdotally through the monitoring that foxes living along kind of the northern shoreline on Santa Rosa, population densities are higher there, and pup production is higher there as well. We don't know yet if it's related to the beach, but that's the basis of the hypothesis. And with the GPS collars, we're going to be able to get more data on the foxes living there and how they're using the beach and how they're moving about through the island. In addition, Katie Elder from Cal Poly up in San Luis Obispo is doing a study that is reproducing a study from Drake et al. In 2015 that is looking at home range size and habitat selection of male island foxes. Now, what's important about this study is when the Drake study was going on, the fox population on Santa Rosa was half or less than half its current size. And the kind of general rule of thumb, as your population densities increase, home range sizes will contract. So we're going to get a re-estimate of home range on Santa Rosa Island, which will then go feedback into population estimates. It builds on existing work. It's incorporating, the data from that will be incorporated into Julianne's study to help enrich that. So we'll get a sense of home range size, how foxes are using the marine resources, in addition to other resources on the island, like the deer mice, the toyon, prickly pears, Carrie talked about further. And then this data can help inform other island managers and look at the resources out there. Now, as I mentioned, since 2018, Friends of the Island Fox has been funding research, and we've provided to date approximately 40,000 in research grant opportunity. We have another grant opportunity this year as well. So if you know anybody, they can go to islandfox.org for that research grant. We talked about Julianne's whisker study. In 2019, we also funded some study looking at cementum analysis. So in your teeth, cementum is a mineralized coating that helps anchor your tooth in its socket. And the interesting thing about that is the cementum is laid down each year, so you get new layers. You can section a tooth and you can essentially count the rings and get an age at death. So this was done post-mortem. That's really important because of understanding the age of a population. Foxes that are very young may not have had, who've died very young, have not had an opportunity to reproduce and add new foxes to the population, versus a fox that passes away at 8-10 years old has had time to replace itself on the island. So it's really important to understand the age of the fox. We've also funded a study with Dr. DeCandia. She's out of Georgetown. She's a professor at Georgetown. She's also associated with the National Zoo, the Smithsonian National Zoo. She's looking at the microbiome, so the bacteria that are on foxes, as well as skunks. We talked about Katie's work, and we, as Friends of the Island Fox, are also very interested in the health of the spotted skunk population. So I would imagine that most of the people online here may have not seen a spotted skunk. They inhabit Santa Rosa and Santa Cruz Islands. They're very nocturnal. So if you're a day visitor out there, the chances of you seeing a skunk is very, very low. Even camping out there, it's very rare to see a skunk, but they are out there. And we're now just trying to understand how skunks are interacting with foxes, as well as the life history of the skunk. There's going to be some interesting information coming out soon about foxes and the skunks, and we can hold that for another talk. As I mentioned, we're accepting applications for our 2020 or 2022 research grant. Islandfox.org is where you can find the application, or you can email me at mike@islandfox.org, and I can help you out there. So that is open until the end of August. The donations were 501c3. We're all volunteers, so we have extremely low overhead. So all of our donations go right back into the foxes and skunks. We help fund health checks, which will include microchipping the foxes. All the foxes that are live captured are microchipped, so we have an ID and a record of them. We look for disease and parasites, serum samples. So we're looking for have they been exposed to canine distemper or rabies, things like that. And we're helping to fund archiving samples. Very important vaccinations, rabies, canine distemper, approximately 100 foxes per island. More on Catalina are vaccinated every year to kind of help protect the population in case of disease introduction. So your donations help go there. And last year and this year, we helped vaccinate 350 foxes on Catalina. So, and we continue to support that island very much in their efforts for vaccinations. And radio collar tracking. Some of the foxes, and you may have seen them when have been out and about in the islands. They have VHF radio collars. So these are small collars that the fox wears for approximately 3 years. Typically, they are sentinel foxes, so they'll be unvaccinated, and they help inform if some kind of disease comes to the island. The collars under a normal condition will, if you have the right radio equipment, will give a beep, beep, beep. If the fox were to pass away, the collar senses no movement. It goes to a beep, 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 beep sound. So it sounds a little bit better than that, a little deeper than that. That's my best impression of a radio collar. And so we're going to some GPS collars this year, which will be Newark technology. They're a lot more expensive, so they won't be widespread across the islands at this time. And you can see down at the bottom that we're looking to fund 10 new radio collars, and they cost approximately $350 each, and close to 40 refurbished collars. We often refurbish collars. One is the park has, and the islands have a limited number of frequencies. So each collar has its own specific radio frequency, and it's very limited on how many kind of frequencies you can have out in the islands. So it's very important to refurbish collars. You can see that the foxes are very hard on them. When probably many of you have been out there, have seen them get rough and tumbly with each other. Yeah, the collars will get beat up, so they can get refurbished and redeployed. And here, so if you have your volume up, okay, let's see, come on, play. There we go. So that was a fox on Santa Rosa. That was collared, I believe it was last year, and you could hear its radio collar going there. So the biologists will go out periodically. Typically it's weekly. They try to do weekly either overflights or ground telemetry to check in on those foxes, because it's very important to know that the collared foxes are still healthy and running around. If they do get a mortality signal, it's important to try to get to the body right away, so that necropsy can be performed and accurately determine cause of death in case of disease introduction or if there's predation by golden eagles, which we haven't seen in a number of years. So kind of the bottom line is healthy island foxes equal healthy ecosystem. They are keystone species out there, meaning, as Carrie kind of described, if the fox population should suffer any type of dramatic loss, or if you should remove the foxes from the island population, it will completely upset the balance out there. You'll have the deer mice population booms and busts, which means it gets very tough on the plant life out there as they get overconsumed by the deer mice, and it becomes a system that gets constantly out of whack and fluctuates, and it's very upsetting to the ecosystem out there. So we don't do this alone. We've, as Ken mentioned at the very beginning, we've partnered with Channel Islands Restoration. We work ourselves across all the islands, not just on the northern islands, but we have contacts with the Navy, with international, the IWS, who's on San Clemente monitoring the foxes. They're also do some seabird, shorebird monitoring on the northern islands. And classrooms, we're in the classrooms doing presentations, other types of public outreach, and we are members of, and we continue to support the Island Fox Working Group meeting, which is an annual meeting bringing all the island fox managers to a central location, as well as biologists and researchers supporting and studying the fox. And we're also doing that now with the Island Spotted Skunk. Carrie and I were just at the Island Spotted Skunk Working Group meeting this morning. So yeah, and we need your help to continue that work. So I want to thank you all for listening, and we're opening it up for questions. Let me turn off that laser pointer. Don't want to put your eye out, kid. There we go.
Great. Go ahead and stop the share. And I do have a lot of questions already, but if you haven't asked a question, go ahead and put that in the Q&A section, folks, and we'll get to them. But I have a few that I highlighted, and there's a few more that I haven't quite gotten to yet. So they're coming in. People are interested.
Good.
And yeah, so this one actually came in after several others, but I think it's so basic we should start with it. How did the island foxes get to the Channel Islands? And I know that's been an evolving question.
I'll take this one.
Go ahead, Greg.
So when I first started doing this in 2005, the theory was that foxes had rafted out when Santa Rosa was one big island, where the three islands were all joined together because water levels were lower during the Ice Age. But we now know through genetic research that island foxes diverged from their gray fox mainland ancestor approximately 9,000 years ago. So at that point in time, we had the separate islands like we see them today. And we also had, as you've seen in other webinars here, human populations out on the islands. So it is looking more likely that a pair of gray foxes, because looking at mitochondrial DNA, we go back to one female introduction. A pair of gray foxes were brought out to Santa Cruz Island by native peoples, probably to help control deer mouse populations. And gradually they were moved, in each case, a single female, most likely with a mate, being moved to each one of the islands. So each one of the islands is a very dramatically genetically separate, because they're all of them populations that start from one introduction and then are isolated going forward in time. Only on Catalina do we see a second female introduction. So the first pair of foxes that are traded down to Catalina, they think it was the Chumash trading with the Tongva in the south, was about 7,000 years ago. And then the next time they traded a new genetic female down there was 500 years ago. So other than that, though, each one of the populations with a single introduction and really connected to humans their whole entire evolution.
Great. Right, and that, by the way, came from Ray Klein, so thank you, Ray. Doreen asked a couple of questions. We'll start with, she mentions that she was camping on Santa Rosa recently and noticed a small collection of mussel shells just a bit off the trail at Water Canyon. When she saw this, she thought perhaps the island foxes might have brought the mussels inland to eat. Is there any evidence that island foxes eat mussels?
I'm not aware of any directly to that. And that also could be ravens and other birds carrying those up there. I have not heard, and I think even in the literature, there's no evidence of a shellfish of any type being provisioned or the foxes using those as resources. But it's kind of a TBD, so I won't say no.
Right.
I would imagine that those were probably brought there most likely by ravens or seabirds.
I wouldn't have necessarily thought about that. Good point. Doreen also asks, are we seeing adaptations of the fox to the environmental changes due to weather conditions? They are survivors, she says. So yeah, are they adapting to this rainfall and the climate change? Good question.
That is a really good question, and that's why we're so interested in this radio collar with the GPS to see how many foxes are venturing all the way to the coastline, combining that with the whiskers to see if we're seeing that happen more, because the whisker information, we have a record going back 10 years with whiskers. And so we really have the opportunity as they are analyzed to see if there are changes. And we've seen some changes with foxes in that when it's good out there and there's lots of variety, foxes as individuals have wide range of what they eat. So there's some individuals who are specializing more in fruit, some that are more insect, but then as the drought comes, we see a narrowing where everybody becomes more dependent on a smaller range of items. So are more foxes starting to access marine foods? That's why we're really interested to see this study. And we heard this morning, Victor, who also was involved with comparing fox activity and skunk activity on Santa Cruz. What he was saying, he was going back and looking at the data because their first group of data they looked at was from 2019. And then they kind of had to take a break a little bit because of COVID and things. And then they got a full year, part of 2020 into 21, July of 2020 to July of 21. And they saw he believes, a dramatic difference because temperatures were, he said that he believes that it was 2 degrees hotter. And that they saw a dramatic increase in foxes being more nocturnal because of the heat. So that is really a whole new avenue of research that is just starting to open up. There's a lot of talk about animals changing seasonally, but like Victor was saying, not a lot of research is being done on how it's impacting animals on their daily activity. And it's a very interesting thing to look at going forward. It's a great question.
Yeah, very good. And it's as it gets hotter, just like when it gets hotter for us, we cut down our activity, right? You imagine the people in Tucson, Arizona, don't go out and play tennis at noon. They wait until it's dark to go out. And the foxes, although it's not like Tucson, Arizona out here, have shown something very similar. When it seems to be warm, they're conserving energy, and trying to get cool, and then they become more, and that shifts their period of activity, which means now they're going to overlap more with skunks, which means potential exchange of diseases or conflict between the two carnivores out there. So there's a lot that we're just now learning, and like the GPS study is going to go a long ways to helping that. With the VHF collar that you heard, you find the fox, that one fox, when you hear its beep, you can say, oh, that fox is in Water Canyon. But you don't know where it's been for the rest of the time. With the GPS, you'll have a track log to see, oh, it hangs out at night up at the campground in Site 15, and then in the day it's down at the beach. You'll have this nice track log or record. So, yeah, thank you.
Great. Well, Carrie, since you mentioned whiskers several times, somebody asked, how do you get a fox whisker? I answered very carefully, but I said I'd have you elaborate.
I do. It's during the health check when foxes get counted. They get a health check, and that's when they're going to be vaccinated. And a single whisker is plucked carefully.
Yeah.
Okay. And Dennis Johns wants to know, this is a good one. How easily do humans interact with foxes? So actually, I'm not sure if he means, like during health checks or at campgrounds or what, but you might address both of those.
Well, and on Santa Cruz out in Scorpion, the foxes can become the cutest pest in the West. They'll be all through the campground. You'll be unpacking your gear and you'll have a fox at the other end of your picnic table. So they're right there. Even camping on Santa Rosa, many times in the evening I'll be sitting out, finishing up my dinner, and I'll have foxes right there on the picnic table. So in the campground area, they are bolder, if you will, and they're right around you. Once you leave the campground, my experience, especially on Santa Rosa, has been once the fox sees me, it'll take a look and then it kind of goes on its way. It doesn't come towards me. It doesn't necessarily just dart away, but they're kind of, once you get out of the campground, they see you more as a threat potential as opposed to a food resource potential, that they do in the campground. So hopefully that answered kind of what you're asking there.
I think it did. Let's see, where am I? So kind of what goes along with that, Kimberly Sinclair wants to know, even though they're wild animals, are they tame? Do researchers get bitten when they hold them? I've held a fox before. Or a researcher.
So
they growled at me.
Yeah, I've heard them growl at each other too.
They're not tame.
It's different from island to island, and the researchers will tell you that the Santa Cruz foxes are the most easily handled. Catalina foxes, it's a different thing. It's not that they're aggressive, because island foxes are not aggressive towards humans because their whole evolution has been with people, but the Catalina foxes have more negative interactions with humans, and so they're not as easily handled. But foxes are wild animals. They're not pets. And over this course of thousands of years interacting with humans, they were not pets. You'll hear people say that, but all of the archaeological evidence and the isotope evidence in their bones is that they were not being fed by people. They were eating their own wild diet. They weren't eating what the people were eating. They weren't getting handouts from the Chumash. So they are a wild animal. They're not an animal that can be domesticated. Foxes that have been in, if you go to the Santa Barbara Zoo, you'll see two boy foxes that are brothers. They seem very docile. And if you knew Finnegan, who was at the Santa Barbara Zoo, he interacted very easily with humans, but he was a very unusual fox. And they've had other foxes that were rescues from different islands that they've tried to have be education foxes, and many of them don't have the personality to do that. So they're not tame, they're wild animals, they're just darn cute.
Yeah, when they're handled during the health checks, they're not anesthetized at all. They are, fully conscious, squirming around sometimes. The biologists use leather gloves, and they often will have a glove that they'll put in the cage when they first start to reach in there for the fox to kind of grab. And very often that the fox will grab a glove. It will latch onto that glove. It won't give that glove back. It takes a little bit of an effort to get it back, which actually is beneficial because it gives the biologist an opportunity to handle the fox. And then they put a bandana over the face to help keep it calm while they do the health checks. But if you were to reach down to try to pet one, you could very quickly find yourself getting bitten by a fully equipped canine carnivore tooth. So please don't try to handle the foxes or pet them, even though they may be right under your feet. They will bite, and it will hurt.
Yeah, on San Miguel, I had the unusual luck of being handy when the vet out there needed to examine a foxtail that had gotten into, or something similar, some vegetation that got into a fox's eye. She took it out of the cage, but she asked me to hold it. So I had a big towel and I had the leather gloves, and it growled as she was pulling on its eye. It seemed pretty calm. But when she goes, now just put it in the cage all at once, and I did. I just launched it into the cage. And when I did, it just scrapped and yelled and went nuts. And she closed the door and she said, "Yeah, you did good." I went, "Okay." So, but that was interesting. Closest interaction.
Yeah, they will go crazy.
But you mentioned the Santa Barbara Zoo. So Linda Sterling would like to know, how involved is the Santa Barbara Zoo with island fox protection?
Oh, the Santa Barbara Zoo has been a very important partner in island fox recovery since the very beginning. So currently, like, the working group meeting is happening at the Santa Barbara Zoo each year. They help to sponsor it. They help to they purchase large numbers of vaccines for the foxes, and so they're able to get a better price, so we can purchase it directly from them to get as many foxes vaccinated as possible. They were vitally important at the very beginning when foxes went into captive breeding facilities on each one of the islands. Island foxes had never been in captivity other than a few foxes that had come off of San Clemente just about 2 years before that, when we needed captive breeding on the islands. And they started out at the Santa Barbara Zoo, and the Santa Barbara Zoo was instrumental in helping to develop how captive foxes should be handled, what their diet needed to be, what was important for them. And to this day, like with COVID, we we still don't know exactly how much of a threat it is to foxes, because it is somewhat a threat to some canines, and it's appearing it could be a, a more serious threat to the spotted skunks. But the foxes that are at the Santa Barbara Zoo have been vaccinated against COVID. So it allows foxes that are in a place where the vets see them on a daily basis to use a vaccine, see how the foxes respond to it, so that we have that information in case we do need it for foxes in the wild. So the Santa Barbara Zoo is vitally important to the wild fox population. We love them.
Yes.
Yeah, and John Campbell asked two questions. And do island foxes exist in other places other than the Channel Islands? And I said, well, there are unique species of the Channel Islands, but I'd ask you about other fox populations that exist in insular locations that you might know of. Is there anything similar to the island fox someplace else?
Well, we had a question just like this from a student at a school that we didn't know the answer, so we had to find this out. So up in the San Juan Islands, San Juan Island itself has a fox population, but they're not island foxes. They're actually red foxes that were introduced to that island probably as escapee animals from the fur trade, from a fox farm. And I think it's 89 years, it's less than 100 years that they have been free roaming on that island, where once again, they have helped to control some introduced rodents and rabbits. So at this point in time, they are protected. You can't hunt them on that island. Will they become their own species over time? Really good question. They'll never be an island fox because there are red fox, which is a completely different thing. And there also are some foxes that are also descended from gray foxes down in Central or South America that are on islands. They're crab-eating foxes, and there's another one specifically, but they're not island foxes. They're foxes who live on islands. So we have our foxes on the Channel Islands. We've got that island fox name. Nobody else has it.
I'm going to get back to John's second question, but just to make sure that we get this out real quick, and I forgot who asked, but the question was, how do you sign up to, oh, it was Danielle Peter no, that's not you. Sorry, Danielle, we'll get to your question. The question was, how do you volunteer? This person would like to sign up to volunteer with you folks. What's the best way to do that?
Reach out at islandfox.org.
So we put that in the chat, that web address. Okay, so
They can send us an email and
oh, and then Susie Bartz, hi Susie, who's with Cindy Kimmick tonight. I happen to know that. Says there's also Darwin's fox, which exists on mainland Chile. And how do you pronounce that? Chiloé Island?
Right, that's right.
Yeah, there's like 24 species of fox globally. So there's many different fox species. And us in North America, we have 6 fox species.
Okay. Yeah, John's second question was, on the islands with small populations, how do you assure some kind of genetic diversity?
This is an ongoing question. We don't assure it. And in fact, research that was done a few years ago showed that the San Nicolas Island fox has the least genetic diversity of, I think they're just behind the Tasmanian devil. Yeah, they're just behind the Tasmanian devil. The caveat to that is that's not looking at the genetic diversity in island foxes on the 4 islands where we went through the recent bottleneck.
Right.
So there
And then
is a
another-
potential there that that genetic diversity is severely impacted, but we believe that since each island's population came from single introductions, we believe that genetic diversity has always been very minimal on these islands. And so far, there are no kinked tails. There are no reproductive issues. There are none of the problems that are typically seen in populations that have genetic issues. So at this point in time, it's something that everybody watches carefully and that we're very concerned about. But foxes, if you look at Santa Rosa, we were down to 15 individuals. Only 4 of those were males. And now we have over, gotta grab my new thing.
2664.
Say that again? Yeah,
Did I get it right?
2,664.
2664.
Yeah, they all go back to those 4 dads.
Yeah, plus or minus 2.
So, it's time for us to do genetic evaluations again.
Great. And it was Susan King who, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that to add to that, kind of 2 things. One, it's not fully understood, but the foxes are good at not inbreeding. So the males seem to be good at getting further out away from their natal area where they were born. And 2, in an area known as the major histocompatibility complex, which is where your disease protections lie, does have high diversity within the foxes. So it has this sort of self-correctedness to it, and that's kind of one of the reasons why there's been talk about mixing populations to increase the diversity, but then there's not enough knowledge that what happens when that takes place. Is it all of a sudden going to lead to an inbreeding suppression where then you will see results of novel disease introduction and things like that? So it's an area that is in a back burner, and there's more that needs to be learned before anything like that could happen.
Great. Interesting. And what I was saying is that Susan King asked the question about volunteering, and she's retired, but she's a licensed RVT, registered veterinary technician. I had to look that up just so you guys know. Susan King. So go for it, Susan. Get on the website and let them know who you are.
You can send an email to me at carrie@islandfox.org. Friends of the Island Fox, we don't send people out as volunteers to do veterinary work, but we compile a list that we give to the land managers across the islands. So if they have a specific need for that they can contact you directly.
Okay. Jason Morandi asks, on Santa Cruz, would you recommend coming to Scorpion, Anchorage, or Prisoners Harbor for the best chance to visit foxes? I answered that question, but why don't you guys go ahead and do it?
Scorpion, yeah. Your best chance is at Scorpion.
It's the best place in the world to see an island fox.
Yeah, especially overnight. If you camp out there at Scorpion, you're pretty much guaranteed to see a fox.
Okay. And Stephanie Yang would like to know, what are your thoughts on adding moisture collecting devices on the cloud forest in Santa Rosa to help improve fox populations, or by improving ground cover in the area? And then let me see, it's kind of connected to that was Ray Klein asking, not much fresh water on the islands. Do the foxes get moisture from their food? So 2 water questions.
Yes, they get moisture from their food. That's an important part of the diet, is getting When they eat deer mouse, succulent plants, they are getting that supplemental moisture from there. So do not feed the foxes chili Fritos. Uh, Suck the moisture out of them. They do get a lot of moisture from what they eat, and then the morning dew and stuff like that provides a supplemental moisture. Carrie?
Yeah, they feel that this past year that the Miguel foxes did slightly better than some of the others because they had greater fog on Miguel. Um, whether that's benefiting the plants and then benefiting the foxes, whether the foxes are getting some gain from the water from that, we don't really know. It would be really interesting to know if foxes would be, I mean, what interactions do they have with some of those fog collectors up there on Santa Rosa? That would be really interesting to know.
It would.
Mhm.
Alex Alcantor says, on the mainland, I often see people hiking with their dogs. Is this a hazard for island foxes?
On Catalina, yes. On the northern island, you're not allowed to have a dog out there. So if you're out there and you see a dog, let the rangers know. It could be from a boater who is illegally letting their pet on the island. There is surveillance out there. There are cameras around the major landings to look for introduction of dogs or mice or rats that may come off from either sea debris or boats that are out there. So no, you can't bring a dog out there. So in the Northern Islands, no. On Catalina, you can bring a dog out there, and yes, pets and foxes don't typically mix well, and that's part of the reason why we do supply a lot of vaccines to Catalina, is to keep that population, especially around Avalon, vaccinated. Because believe it or not, you can bring an unvaccinated dog to Catalina, and it's not a requirement. I think it should be out in Avalon. So if someone's out there today on Avalon listening in, yeah, I think it should be a requirement, but it's currently not. On the Navy Islands, they do have dogs. The Navy has protection dogs, service. Yes, sir. I don't want to call them service dogs because we think of
Right.
dogs, but they have working dogs that the security forces use, and they go through additional training, and there's a lot of effort put on to ensure that there's not a negative interaction with the security dogs and the foxes. And the Department of Navy, I think, does a good job with their biology programs on both islands to work to limit the impacts from the operations out there. And looking at the island data, I mean, it's consistent, and they're very active in promoting fox welfare. So kudos to the Navy out there.
And anonymous, have there been notable examples of foxes traveling from one island to another via natural rafts or man-made vessels?
There's
Yeah,
none known,
none
and it
known.
doesn't show up in the genetics either.
Predators typically don't do overwater crossing, and I'll say that, and then somebody's going to talk about Isle Royale, the wolves out there.
There's ice.
Yeah, there's ice, but they typically don't. So no, they're not jumping in the water, or swimming, or trying to raft to other islands. So there's no evidence of that occurring.
And surprisingly, we lose a couple of foxes every year who get into water barrels and then drown. They're not good swimmers. We've lost pups in the surf where they've had their head in a potato bag and then panicked and went in the surf, and then they drown. They're not good swimmers. They don't have a
They're short.
desire to do that.
Yeah, when you see an island fox, you'll see it's got tiny little legs to body ratio. So unlike your golden retriever that can swim well, island foxes, gray foxes are not very good swimmers, and actually I know gray foxes don't really like to get their feet wet. They act a little bit cat-like and try to go around puddles and stuff like that. I imagine island foxes are the same way.
Okay, and Anonymous wanted to point out that you can bring vaccinated service animals to Channel Islands National Park, and then provided a web link to prove it.
That's true.
Yes,
That's
you
true.
can. Yes, I was out there in the fall or winter, and yes, you can have a service dog out there. It takes about 6 months to go through the permitting process. There's a whole big stipulation, and they've had working dogs for conservation out there as well. Dogs that were looking for Argentine ant populations.
Right.
So yes, a dog can legally go out on the island, a permitted dog, but it is a rigorous permitting process. It's not something that you could decide, oh, I want to go to the islands this weekend, I'll call up and get a permit. It's going to take you a while, veterinary sign-offs, and a lot of work to get that permit. Plus about $500.
During the pig hunting on Santa Cruz Island, our dogs were taken out there too, and they were vaccinated and then isolated in a pen for a long time. And it was just quite an interesting feeling to be driving down the same road that I had done so many times and go by this pen with like 20 dogs, and then there was this barking roar.
Right.
I'm like, oh my God.
And the Chumash did have dogs. They did have domesticated dogs. I mean, dogs have been domesticated for 50,000 years. Chumash, or the predecessors of the Chumash, have been out in the islands for at least 13,000 years. They did have pets. There are evidence of dogs being buried with ceremonial burials with dogs and foxes. So yes, they have interacted in their history, but today, a dog just can't easily get to the island without going through a big permitting process.
And we lose a couple of foxes every year on Catalina that are attacked by dogs. So it's just one of those things. The fox will run and the dog will chase it. It's a hard thing not to have happen between two potentially competing predators.
And then I was a harbor commissioner for 16 years, and I wasn't, people in that position are not always popular with the public. But so one guy who didn't like government at all was a boater. And I was at Prisoners Harbor one day, and who do I see coming ashore with his dog? Mm-hmm. I'm like, oh, hi. And he was surprised to see me. So he was being nice, but I had to be the one to say, you're not supposed to have your dog here. It's a threat to the island foxes. And so I'm sure he went away thinking, oh, but anyway, he didn't stay long, so I didn't report him. But
it's not just that the dog is a threat to the foxes. I don't think people are really aware as well that our islands have parasites that are unique to the islands. And that's one reason why foxes weren't brought to the mainland for captive breeding. Some of these parasites can be absorbed through the paws of your dog. Foxes have evolved with some of these parasites. It's an amazing thing that they survive some of these intestinal parasites that they get. Your dog would not be so lucky. So it's just better for everyone's sake. It's just healthier, safer for dogs to stay away from the islands.
Okay, we have a few more questions, and I want to get to them in the next couple minutes here. But you mentioned the fruit dispersal work. Who's doing that work?
What was that?
I mean,
the fruit dispersal.
Oh,
so
fruit dispersal.
Toyon, etc.
Oh, who's looking at the germination rates?
Well, who's studying that? that who's doing the work is what.
Right. It's somebody it's a young man who's working with the national park, and he's either from the University of Oregon or Washington. I couldn't remember. That's why I didn't put in his exact name. But he started out looking at interconnections with the mice, the deer mice, and then has branched into looking at what the fox is doing as well. So we'll be having more information on that in the future.
Right. Doreen says she observed foxes marking trails. Are they territorial in the sense that they require a range for best survival rates?
Yes, they are territorial, and yes, they will poop on any elevated surface, boots included. So when you talk about territoriality among wild canids, it's not cut and dry like state boundaries. They constantly expand and contract seasonally. So it's not a fixed number. Population densities on Santa Rosa, I think, are
It's over 12.
yeah, it's around
I was just looking at that
12,
earlier.
something like 12 foxes per square kilometer. You go to the literature, the home range size of a fox is approximately a kilometer in size, and then typically what happens is you'll have related foxes are the ones closest to one another. So typically you'll have your alpha pair, the male and female, have adjacent territories, and then you'll typically will have a related female nearby, and the males are moving a bit farther out away from that area, and it kind of goes that way. And the home range study that's happening beginning this monitoring season, so next month or in August on Santa Rosa, is going to help answer some of those questions on how neighboring foxes are actually moving, because we'll have the GPS data to look at. But it's about a kilometer right now in the literature. Each island varies a little bit, and it's going to vary as populations go up and go down. Home range sizes will kind of expand and contract. The core range is where they're really getting a lot of their resources is something that they'll heavily defend, and that's going to be smaller than that 1 kilometer. So if you think about your home range size, like I live in Ventura, mid-Ventura, my home range is kind of Ventura. You can kind of throw a dart at a Ventura, and I could be in anywhere of those locations, but my core range is really between, here and Bonds, where I'm getting my resources, and I will defend kind of that area more so because that's where I need to get my
I'll keep
food.
that in mind, Mike, when I'm down there.
Okay, yeah,
He might fight you off.
yeah, I'll get all defensive when you get down to Ventura.
But that's why this it's a perfect question, because that's why this research study is so important. We have lots of ideas of what we think it is, but this is going to really show us what's actually happening. Maybe foxes are crossing each other's territories more than we thought. It's really important that we do this work to find that out.
Okay, and Cliff Rodriguez had just a comment. He was talking with John Guarini recently about dog and fox interactions during the ranching period, and he says the foxes were very evasive and they'd get chased by the dogs, but the dogs would catch them.
Yeah,
That makes sense.
yeah. So island foxes are descended from gray foxes. Gray foxes are a small fox species that are subordinate to coyotes.
Right.
So as Cliff's here in Ventura as well. Hey, Cliff. As we have larger coyote populations, it's going to drive the gray fox populations to the boundaries, and often you showed me that photo where the gray fox was in someone's backyard, and island foxes are kind of behaving, I'd expect them to behave that same way during the ranching period. And they can climb trees, so they'll escape, scurry up a tree to avoid the dog. And I imagine that's a kind of an innate reaction that was brought down with them from the days when they were a gray fox.
Okay, Benjamin's got a good question. Do we know the optimal fox population the islands can sustain, and are we there yet regarding island fox population recovery?
Yeah, good question. So the data suggests, especially on Santa Rosa, that the island has reached carrying capacity. So that is the amount of foxes that the island can sustain. So we're at 2664 right now. It's an estimate. No, the foxes weren't lined up and counted. It's mathematical equations that go into coming up with that number. So yes, there are limits to the population. The island foxes, as well as many other wild canids, will adjust their populations based on the density. So we honestly expect to see the population dip next year, which would be normal. So if you see, we're publishing this data. I don't know if it's on the website yet, Carrie, but we'll be putting up the island fox population numbers. And if you look like next year, you may see it go down, and that would be kind of a normal thing, nothing to get alarmed about, because it will bounce year to year as foxes adjust their population size to manage the resources that are out there. So there is a number. What that number is, can we just like come up and say, oh, Santa Rosa is 2,700, Santa Cruz is 3,000. You can't do that because there's a lot of different factors, but the foxes are telling us on, especially Santa Cruz and Santa Rosa, that they have and are reaching the carrying capacity out there.
And San Miguel as well.
San Miguel.
When they started to recover, there was really kind of a feeling that they would were stabilizing around 600. But it is turned out that especially if we have climate challenges, that's too high, that the population can't find enough resources. So we've seen it come down. And so now it's looking more like it's, between 300 and 400. So that's always going to be a small and vulnerable population because it's small.
Yeah, and different animals have different strategies for dealing with their densities. Mice will expand until they eat themselves out of existence. They have a very, fast reproductive rate. Island foxes, 2 pups is a typical litter. It's going to be a much slower increase, and they're able to, manage populations. Deer will rapidly expand if they have the opportunity to do that, because they're essentially a prey species. So kind of survival means, flooding the landscape, whereas carnivores need to manage populations to keep themselves in check based on available resources. So yeah, it's a survival strategy that's kind of built into the equation for each species.
Okay, I've got a few more here, so we'll try to get through them, but it's great. I love it. We always get vigorous questions from our folks watching the webinar. So Danielle Peter wants to know, having volunteered on San Nicolas Island with CIR, folks noticed that many of the foxes were frequently, it's not what I'm trying to say, frequenting the base housing and hanging out in spots for food, and maybe stealing socks, she said.
They all steal socks.
The question is, are there notable changes in personality or development, I suppose, on San Nicolas, you say, that you've noticed?
I don't know about personality. We did have an issue on San Nicolas where the population took a dip there. It's also a small island, and so a smaller population really impacted by drought prior to 2018, earlier than that. But a lot of the planting that you guys did out there, I've seen pictures of where they've introduced the prickly pear, and it's amazing how much it has increased. It's providing a lot more resources, and they're looking now to provide plants that are supporting insect populations that the foxes need. I think they are seeing that as there are more natural resources for foxes, that they're seeing a smaller population that's in the town area. More foxes. Foxes would actually prefer to find their natural food and not have to deal with people. So they are seeing a smaller number of people, foxes in the town area. So that's good. You guys have made a big difference out there in helping to plant those plants. Big difference.
That's great. Thank you so much. We love to hear that. So that's really neat. Really neat. Yeah, planting prickly pear is interesting, as a lot of people on this webinar know. So Stephen Seaman has a couple questions. If the foxes released on an island were all from the same litter, they would share the mother's DNA. So more than just one pair of fox
That could be.
island could have been introduced. I guess
That-
if I had a mouse problem in my barn, I would want more than one cat.
right.
So I guess it's more of a
Yeah,
comment.
that's a good question. That's a real good question. So you're looking at kind of the DNA, and what happens is you can have more than one female if they're closely related females. So if you were to take, 5 sisters and populate the island, it would show up kind of as one, set of mitochondrial DNA. So most likely it wasn't literally one fox, it's one matriline. It's a group of closely related foxes, and it's possible that there were others, but they died. And so you don't have them in the population. And this is something, Carrie, that I discussed with Ellie regarding her skunk work, kind of ad nauseum, pressuring her, or I shouldn't say pressuring her, but pestering her with questions about skunk populations and analysis. And it could be it could have been multiple, it probably was multiple closely related females. It shows up in the data now as one, and if there were others, they may have died off. So yeah, so that's a really good observation. And yeah, if I had a big mouse problem in my garage, I'd want more than one cat in there.
Yeah, island spotted skunks, just since you bring them up, endemic to Santa Cruz and Santa Rosa Island. I got to hold a baby for several trips that was adopted temporarily, and it would crawl under people's shirts and go to sleep. Oh my God. Maury, we need a webinar on island skunks. But moving on with island foxes.
I know who we can talk to. So
We
if you
do.
want, yeah.
Okay. We'll have Maury get in touch with you about that, because they are a very interesting species.
And there's just been a couple of 2021 or 2022 release papers. So there's fresh data out there, and yeah.
I have a picture of me holding one. So a little tiny thing.
So cute.
It was so cool, so soft. I fell in love with skunks that day. So Stephen also, he's wondering who should you report an injured animal to? So if you see one limping like a scorpion, apparently he has, who would you report such things to?
Well, you can let the ranger know. There's often the enforcement ranger, Josh is out there, or one of the island guides, or you can let one of the naturalists know. They're in the darker blue shirts that are out there. You can let them know, and they can pass the info along. Honestly, the way it works is unless the fox has a human caused injury, they're going to let nature take its course. So if two foxes get into a fight and one gets a serious injury, um, they're not going to intervene. If a fox, and this is especially true on Catalina and the Navy Islands, if there's a fox that gets hit by a car, they will take action to give the fox veterinary care. But there's not a lot they can do. There's not a big veterinary service out there. You can report it, and if the biologists happen to be on the island, they can try to take a look. But most of the time, you'll see it, and then they'll make it their way into the vegetation, and it would be a while before that fox could be caught again. So it's sad. It's one of those heartbreaking things. I've seen injured foxes out there, and it's sad. It's like you want to do something for this animal, but nature's going to take it. Nature's going to take its course. And I've told others that the beauty of the Channel Islands is you get to see a top predator in action up close, but that comes with, you're also going to see kind of the negative of that top predator, either killing a mouse, or fox on fox interaction, or, as you mentioned, an injured fox. So there is that negative that unfortunately there's not a lot that will be done.
And the nature of scorpion is not only will you see lots of foxes, but it's looking like that there's the possibility that there's a higher chance of seeing an injured fox there, because when there's people there in the campground, they provide a bit of protection for a fox who is injured. Because people don't like to see foxes fight, they don't like to see another fox pick on another fox, so they'll make sounds and gestures to stop an altercation. So if you're a fox who's been forced out of your territory, especially older males, going into the campground area is potentially a safer place than out there in the rest of the wild. So sometimes there's a higher percentage of seeing a fox who's injured in that area, just because of the protection that people provide by just being there.
So this stimulated another question. How do you know if it was human caused, the injury? Susan King.
Yeah, that's a hard one, and I probably don't have a good answer for that. On Catalina, you can tell when it's kind of a vehicle strike. They have, you can see they have like the broken leg on the side of the road. Out on the northern islands in the park, I think it's very rare when you have a human-caused injury, and most often when those happen, it's around a piece of infrastructure that the rangers are already aware of, and it's not something that visitors would normally see. Yeah. And
okay, and finally, Ray Klein wants to know, have fox populations increased since grazing animals have been removed from San Clemente Island?
Wow, I don't know that question, because what was the date when they were removed from San Clemente?
So I guess goats were the last ones that were there, I think. That's been quite some time.
Yeah, I think that as far as I know, I think that the goats being removed from Clemente was before 2005. The fox population on Clemente is probably one of the most stable. And I can't answer that completely honestly, because there was a period of time on Clemente when counting was very averaging. It wasn't detailed. So some of what we have in our record might be undercount. but definitely the foxes out there have been doing very well for the last 20 years. No, they're the only population that hasn't had any kind of a serious decline at all. So since the year 2000 that I know of. I know from the year 2000. I don't know about before that, but their population has been very stable. And when the Navy reported at the working group meeting this year, they had data going back longer than I had ever seen before, and there were no drops in the population there. The population there is really stable at around between 800 and 1,000. You know, it's a really stable population. They're doing very well out there.
Okay, well, we had like 32 questions or something. That's pretty
great.
darn good. So, and about 100 attendees at our top max there. So thank you, Carrie and Mike. Yay.
Thank
Good-
you
good
so
job.
much.
Yeah, thanks for
It's so
having
great
us.
seeing you again and hearing about your good work. And the upcoming webinars, folks, which of course you can see again on, where you can see the past ones on cirweb.org/webinars. But we have some upcoming ones that are going to be interesting. So next month, we're going to have Chuck Graham. He's a wildlife photographer, and he's spent a lot of time kayaking and taking pictures at various places on the Channel Islands.
Yeah,
So
that'll be
get
great.
ready for some cool pictures. Chuck.
Yeah.
We saw some of his pictures of skunks this morning.
Oh, see, don't get me started.
And he's got a great
and-
Carrizo Plain. So yeah,
Oh, nice.
ask him a lot of questions about the wildlife of Carrizo Plain.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I'll have to do a separate one maybe in that. But and then in August, we're going to have Matt Gilliams with the Santa Barbara Botanic Gardens come back. Last year, he talked to us about the flora of Santa Catalina, as in the book, the flora of the Santa Catalina. And in August, he'll be coming back to talk about the new flora of the Channel Islands. So there's a new book coming out.
Oh, great.
Of all 8 Channel Islands. I don't know when, but he's still in process, but he's going to
Awesome.
update us on that in August. So I'm looking forward to that. And so, folks, with that, we'll end the webinar, but I do want to remind you, Channel Islands Restoration is a nonprofit organization, and we could always use support from donors. It makes a huge difference to our operation when people step forward and donate. There's a lot of staff time that goes into creating these webinars. It's part of our mission to provide neat educational programs like having Mike and Carrie join us. But they cost us some money, and so do a lot of our other programs. And you just heard from these folks the difference that Channel Islands restoration can make for even island foxes and other animals when we do projects like we did on San Clemente Island, where we planted tens of thousands of plants. So thank you for everyone thanking us for the nice presentation. I see those popping up. We enjoy it. And
Joining us.
you guys are great. All of you are great for joining us. And Mike and Carrie, you're doing a great job. Support Friends of the Island Fox, and please support Channel Islands Restoration. And we'll see you next month, if not before. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.